All right, welcome back everyone to Jface Games. Today we are talking about, the mini games mechanics that we're still working on. But first, what we're going to talk about is roll and write games. So this guy, where's my hand? This guy? In the comments of the last mini game videos, mentioned looking at the game Rolling Realms by Steadmeyer Games, and they created games, or they published games like Scythe and Wingspan and Viticulture and Tapestry and all sorts of games, but they also publish a roll and write game called Rolling Realms. Now, I love roll and write games. I've played Rolling Realms. I own the Railroad Inc. is the one that I own, but here is a whole genre of games on BoardGameGeek.com called roll and write. Now, there's a ton of them on here, and this is showing the ranking. Railroad Inc. is the one I play, and down here you will find Rolling Realms. Now, what is a roll and write game for those that don't know? Roll and write games, a really cool game mechanic where, in essence, everybody has the same stuff, right? In essence, you will have some sort of player board, right? And then you're going to have dice. Now, everyone's going to have the exact same player board. And in this game, Rolling Realms, everyone has 3 cards in front of them. And those 3 cards are, in essence, different point soups, right? Different ways you can score points. Now, what makes a roll and write interesting and fun is that everyone has the same stuff in front of them, whether it's a player board or cards. And one of the players is going to roll dice. Now, some games have custom dice. Other games like this, Rolling Realms, uses standard D6s. But when one player rolls the dice, however many there are, everyone looks at whatever the values are and uses them how they feel they think is the best way to use them, right? So it's a perfectly balanced game. Everyone has the exact same information. They're just going to decide how they want to use it differently from everyone else, right? So it's really cool. Really cool mechanic, and it really does lend itself nicely if you have a game where you're already rolling dice, and now the values of those dice can be used for something else, like a minigame, right? So I was really, really excited to hear about this game being mentioned. Now, what did that do? Well, I went insane. So this is all of the cards from the game, Rolling Realms, and I kind of went into details about which ones I like. Now, there's a caveat here, right? When you're thinking about mini games, and I put the caveat up here, the potential problem. When you're thinking about borrowing from a game like Rolling Realms, any sort of roll and write needs to have difficult decisions, right? You have to have multiple choices that you would take the dice value and put it towards, right? So that being said, there are this many cards in the game Roll and Write, and you're going to play with 3 of them. You're not going to have 2 or 3 of these as a mini game on your character sheet, because then that becomes an actual full game. You'd have only probably 1 of these, right? And I'll show you what they kind of look like. But if you've only got 1 of them, you then run into the problem of, is there actually a decision to be made? Or is you just taking values and just putting them in there, right? So that's the question, is there an actual interesting decision, right? Over here I have sort of the generalized mechanics that are shown, but let me show you some of these cards first, right? So what's cool about Roll and Write games is they have made a miniature card of every game in their catalog for Steadmeyer, and it's supposed to sort of encapsulate the idea of what does that game kind of feel like. So here's a Feast of Odin, and Feast of Odin has this sort of, I forget what they call these, but it's like those Tetris pieces, right? So in this game, this little mini game, what happens is someone's rolled 2 dice, you see 2 values, you can assign one of those values to any of the cards and the other value to any other card, right? Or I think you can assign them both values to the same card. But this is showing you that if you have a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, you can use one of these different shapes to then color in that pattern here, getting whatever resources and points you want. It's pretty cool. And for myself and my buddy Bruno, who we were looking at these cards together, we went through like half of these together. It was saying, we thought this is... I thought that the more complex the minigame, potentially the worse it is for a TTRPG, right? Whereas when you watch reviews for Rolling Realms, there are a lot of people that are like, oh, I love this card more. This other card's a little too simple. But when you're thinking about borrowing it for a TTRPG mechanic, simple's probably better just because of the fact that it's not having a lot of like, I don't want you having so much downtime looking at your minigame as opposed to comparing what's going on in the actual game. We thought Tactician or Sorcerer, this is kind of cool because it kind of could mirror battlefield strategies or resources available to you. So that was kind of neat. Aviary, this is another game where this is another mini game that's showing that in essence there's a lot going on here, right? This is one of those ones where you roll 1 or 2 or 3. You can assign that 1, 2, or 3 here, or you can spend any number available to upgrade a 1 to a 2, a 2 to a 3, a 3 to a 4. Once everything's filled, you then get whatever this circle is, etc. Right? So this felt more like a crafting or a building. There's a lot of these that fit into the concept of you are building orders and you are building over time, right? So for me, that brings up the question of how much time do you want to spend on a minigame before it benefits you, right? If you are a caster, for instance, and you're putting all the power of that caster into a minigame, it might mean that they're weak at the beginning of a combat or an encounter, and they don't get stronger until you unlock things. And is that fun? Does that mean you don't have your powers available to you at the beginning, right? For some, that might be really fun. For other games, it might not be. So you have to think about what kind of game are you going to have. So I'm going to start skipping around to some of the specific mechanics. Here is they start first working on straights, where it's like you're going to try and get a straight here, either 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this one's descending, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, right? And so you're having to choose, when am I going to take that token and put over here versus over here, and then down here are one-time uses. Like you can take a 4 and you could turn this resource into that resource one time, then you kind of scratch it out. Right? So here is the first time you kind of see these straights. And for us, once again, that's a very specific building of powers. This one was, I believe, anytime you roll these dice, you then put those down here and you start stacking them up. But then at any point in time, you can turn in a row, right? Something along those lines, right? Use a number to gain the benefit equal to the... No, I'm sorry. It's a little different. So what it is that at the end of your turn, you circle one of these circles. So these rows are building over time, but anytime you want, you can spin the die to turn in that row, but it's a one-time turn in. So this is a nice little risk reward, right? Do I turn in this when I've only got one circle, or do I wait to get 5 circles before I turn that in? But once again, that's a timing thing, right? You are building time, right? So we thought this could be some sort of social encounter, exploration, or this could be, once again, some sort of increase in damage. Maybe one of these is like number of targets, number of damage dice, number of the distance, condition. So it could fit maybe with some sort of like building power. Here's another sort of, once again, you have these columns and whatever's on top has to be higher than what's on below. So it's not a straight, but it is sort of, I can have a 6 here, a 4 here, and a 1 here, and then I would complete that column, okay? So you can see these kind of get interesting, right? And let's talk about some of the mechanics now from an overview of what mechanics actually kind of existed here, right? So we have limited resource, right? So it's like, you have shapes to use, but it's limited in how many of those shapes you have. You have boxes to check, but those boxes are specifically associated with specific resources, and then they kind of run out. You have these build orders, right? You're either ascending dice or descending dice, or you have occasional barrier, right? Number needed. So it's like there was one over here where you can see that it's you're cruising along, but to fill in this circle, you need a specific type of number, right? So there's this sort of barrier, or I guess you could call it like a funnel or something, where it slows you down temporarily unless you have the right thing. So there's these occasional barriers. You have turn-ins, which give you the decision of, do I wait longer to get more? There are different turn-in triggers, right? Some are fast and some are slow. Like, for instance, over here's a card for Pendulum, where, in essence, what's happening with this card is that different things are happening to allow you to circle these. And whenever you want, you can turn in one of these hourglasses to get that resource. But you can see the turn-in requirement is different, right? So this is, if I want to grab one of those resources, I could put a 6 here, and that's it. But then if I get more resources up here that I want to grab later on, I would need a 5 and a 4, or a 3, 2, and 1, right? So these are variable degrees of being able to turn in for that power, right? For whatever it is you're trying to get. There are trades where you're trading different resources for different resources. You have matching. There are different scenarios where you're trying to get like a 5 in this bucket and a 5 in this bucket or something along those lines. You have specials. So there's a lot of these where like the 6 is wild, and that 6 can be used for all sorts of different things. Or if you get doubles, if you get 2 6s at the same time, then you get something else. The other thing that's interesting is that I don't think... value on dice... No, where is it? 6 is wild down here. The other one is here. Use 1 dice, but the other number affects you positively or negatively. I know I skipped, but it just felt like I needed to talk about that one. Right, so that's an interesting one where it's like, I want to use... Here, this is a great one, I think, for that. Charterstone. I want to use this 2. I rolled a 2 and a 6, right? I want to use this 2, so I scratch off the 2 here, and I write the 6 here. And this makes a very interesting mechanic. I really like this one, because what happens here is that you then end up with numbers down here, and at any point in time, you can turn in and scratch off duplicate numbers. So if I have 3 6s down here, I get to scratch off those 3 6s and use them, right? To me, this is a really cool spike damage mechanic, where it's like any sort of spiking class or a healing class. What in essence you're doing is it's like, I'm going to try and get to have 3 3s. Anytime I can turn in 1 or more of the same number, I then add all of those numbers to my damage, right? Like that's what came to my mind. So if I can get 4 3s down here, I can turn them all in and do an extra 12 damage or whatever. Like that sounds cool, right? That sounds really interesting to me. What else do we have? We have value on die moves you on a path, move the value. So this is literally like they have these different paths here. So if you had a 3, you would go 1, 2, 3, and then you would circle this. And if next time you did a 5, you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so you're actually using the number to move along a path. And there's a couple like that. Value determines the direction. That was a neat one too. Let's see here. For the role player, if it's a 3, if you start here, if it's a 3, you move this way. Then you go 4, you go that way. Then you go 1, you go that way. So that's kind of neat, right? That might be... The nice thing is some of these mini games might be for the RP exploration side of things, right? Dice turn in as a wild resource. Already had that. Path choices. So there's a couple different ones where it's like that ascending, descending concept, but it's more of a path you're on. Where's a good example of that? Down here. Here's a path one where you're starting here, and depending on the dice, you're going different directions, right? And then those different things can give you different resources. So that was really cool. And there's different branches, and you choose which way to begin, potentially. That's another one, is you can have a choose where you're beginning. So this was a cool one that I really loved, where here, it's like, you can choose to start here and go all this way, or you can just choose to start here and go to here, but you're never going to get those resources, right? So you can kind of start in the middle of a path if you want, knowing that it's not going to pay off as much, right? Total score, so at some point in time you could have the total numbers that you've accrued actually mean something in the end of the thing. Total of both values rolled, so different things might have a yes, you play 1 die, but then the total value of the die means something completely different. And then there's another one where it's like total value recorded and then your current die, right? That was a really fun one for here, where it's like you're rolling die and you store those die. So I rolled a 3 at one point in time, so I circled the 3. Now, or 4 is a better example. So I roll a 4 and I store that 4. Now later on, I roll a 6, right? So I can either store that 6 or I can use that 6 plus the 4 I stored to gain this 10, right? So it's an interesting like unlocking power ability, right? That is actually a card individually that actually has an interesting choice to it, where you could actually choose one or the other potentially, right? So I like that. I like that idea. And then you have a couple that do a build order and a turn in. They do both. And then you have some that have a path and a build order turn in, right? So there's a lot of cool stuff here. I'm going to show you one other one that's probably my favorite card in this whole thing. Well, there's probably 2 of them that are my favorite cards in this whole thing. But this Libertalia one, I thought this was so neat, right? Where in essence what this is saying is that you have to follow this order. You have to come down this path and then come here and then come here. But whatever die you roll, you have to, or whatever die you choose to put in, you have to plug it in there. And this total number has to be less than this one. So if I put a 6 here, that means that this is 6. And let's say I put a 3 here. So now I'm at 31. That's a big jump. That means this has to be a 3 or higher, a 36, a 46, a 56. If I put a 6 here, I'm screwed because I can't get higher than a 66, right? Because this would be 65. So I'd be stuck, and that would be it, right? So I think this is a really cool mechanic. And then this other one up here is sort of the same thing, but what this does is a little twist on it, is that you have to go in order, and at any point in time, you have to break that order. So it's like I put a 6 here, and now I have to start over. I'm going to put a 1 here. I have to take whatever the penalty is to do that, to put the 1 there. And so that's cool, right? That allows you to potentially have these quick spikes. Like I think I put Warlock. This seems cool for a Warlock sort of game, right? It's like you're making deals with your patron, and so it's a meta currency of some sort. You're losing hit points, for instance. So anyways, there's a lot of cool stuff here. There's a lot of cool stuff. And this has helped me a lot in terms of thinking about mainly the mage or the talents minigame. So now we've talked about this game and all these minigames. Let's go into some of the minigames that have been designed. I'll put little timestamps so people can skip around and you can come back to it. And let's talk about the minigame for the rogue, where that's landed. Well, let's start from the beginning. Let's start back here, right? So the warrior one has not changed, right? I like it, but I have added a little mini game to make it a little bit more potentially interesting, right? That little mini game is that over here somewhere you would have something like 1 and 2, and then it's like battle positions, right? And then so what this would be is that at any point in time, you're rolling your 2 die. You're rolling your 2 die to do damage, right? That's the main thing you're rolling your 2 dice for. And so you're rolling 2d6, maybe you're rolling 2d8, maybe you're rolling 2d10. And so there's a penalty, technically, if you're rolling a bigger weapon. It's harder for you to maybe coordinate the battlefield. I don't know thematically how it works. But at any point in time, one of those dice has a 1 or a 2 on it. You then have the choice to engage a battle positions, right? And what this is a team sort of scenario, right? So this is like, I think that some of the things I talked about potentially having for mine were like, and I'd love to take any sort of thoughts from people, would be something like, oh, that's a lot. You disengage an ally from an enemy, right? And then you engage that enemy. And as long as it's in the same zone, as long as you're in the same zone with someone else, all of a sudden you disengage an ally and you engage that enemy. Boom, right? Some stuff like this. That might be too powerful. Another one might be put an ally in cover near you. So all of a sudden you take an ally anywhere in the battlefield and you put them in cover near you. And if they're engaged with an enemy, that enemy has to come with them, right? So that's an interesting sort of thing. So it's giving the warrior class agency. And yes, it all kind of sits, I think, more with the tactician class than, say, like the Fury or the Seeker, but who cares? Like, we'll try it out, we'll play test it. We could come up with some that are a little bit more those class sort of specific, maybe. But I like the idea that now, not only are you choosing your battle stance, but if you happen to roll a 1 or 2 in your damage die, you can be like, hey, let's move you, let's do this, right? And hopefully these are quick decision ones. I want to make them kind of ease of access, right? All right, what about the rogue? Okay, so what you're going to have is you're going to have these 3 like bars in essence. And we're going to call these the plan, right? Something along those lines, right? So you have these plans. And these 3 bars are very different thematically from each other. One of them is going to be more for like movement of some sort, like mass movement or very quick, big movement, whatever. One of them is going to be more for like high damage. And then one of them is going to be for sort of like team buff, right? Team buff of some sort. Some way you're able to help out the team. Now, how do these fill up? And so imagine that each one of these has like, I'm just going to make this super sloppy, but imagine they have tons of bars here that all sort of like, this is how many ranks you can go up, right? Now, how do these fill? These are always going to fill at the beginning of your turn. You can point 1 somewhere. So at the beginning of the turn, you're going to fill one of these bubbles. And so no matter what, it's filling 1 every turn. Now, when you take this goes back to this idea. So let's put over here how they fill. How they fill. 1. Place 1 on your turn at beginning, no matter what. So that's one way. Another way they fill. Well, another way they fill is that when you take a tactical action. No, let's get rid of this. Sorry, this is not here because you're always going to take a tactical action. So the way they fill, so we're making things on the fly. The way they fill is tactical action. If it is a risky, let's say risky equals 1 or 2, and the other one we decided to say is calculating. Calculating equals 1. Now, there was a good point by Drew made in the comments about, well, what if someone wants to play that more calculating class? Well, in the subclasses, you will have, in essence, different powers that different subclasses can have, right? So there's 3 subclasses. You've got the Breeze, which is sort of your fast-moving sort of thief-esque rogue. You've got the Stalker, which is sort of your assassin, sort of high damage type rogue. And you have the Muse, which is more of your bard-like, right? So the way this would work is that if you're a Breeze, you have, in essence, you're going to, well, no, if you are a Breeze or a Muse, this is the rule set you're going to be using, right? If you are a Stalker, there will be in the Stalker powers, one of the powers you can take that flips this. That now risky is 1 and calculating is 2, right? So you can always, and because of the way subclasses are going to work, you can be a Breeze who is able to dip into the Stalker subclass and take that, and vice versa, right? So now that gives you that access to potentially be a little bit more methodical, right? Stalker subclass, and we'll say calc equals 2, risk equals 1, okay? All right, now what else? The other thing is any point in time, you roll a nat 6 on one of your dice equals add 1. We'll do +1 somewhere. But there's limit 1 a turn, right? So these are the ways you're going to now fill these meters, right? But the other thing that'd be cool is that different of these subclasses, once you take that subclass as your main subclass, some of these are auto-filled, right? So if you are a Breeze, the bottom 2 for this are auto-filled, right? These bottom 2 are auto-filled, right? If you are the Stalker, these bottom 2 are auto-filled, and if you're the Muse, these bottom 2 are auto-filled. Now, what that does is that you have an advantage filling this one up to get a bigger buff, but you can do any of these if you want to. Now, at any point in time, you'll be able to turn in one of these, like, you don't have to get it full to be able to do it. It's just if it gets full, it has a bigger effect. You can always just put here, use it, put here, use it, and whatever the case might be. So, hopefully that was clean. Hopefully I described that clean. I know I was kind of talking off the bat, but in essence, you have 3 different plans you can execute. You can fill these plans up any order you want. You can have 2 of them filling at the same time. Depending on how high it is when you turn it in and it empties out, that is going to give you a different type of bonus. How you fill these is through your actions. If it's a tactical action that is risky, you get to fill 2 spots in the same plot. You can't do 1 here and 1 there. If it is a calculating tactic, you only put 1, unless you've used the Stalker subclass, that's flipped. And also, if you ever roll a natural 6, you get to add an extra 1. So you can technically add 3 in a turn. So this might be filling pretty quick. And so these bars might not be 6, they might be a little higher, right? They might be 9, who knows? So that's the idea for the mini game for the Rogue. What about the Zealot? The Zealot mini game, where's the Zealot? Zealot's over here, yeah. The Zealot mini game is a little different, right? So previously it was the idea of this sort of faith concept, and we were trying to think about how you're gaining faith, et cetera, et cetera. So what have we come up with now? So this next one is, I'm still going to call it faith, but I could see it being called something else, right? So let's zoom in here so we can really talk about this. Now, what happens? The Zealot's going to have 2 dice on their character sheet, right? In this little area. You're going to have a Trials dice and a Glory die. right? And so these are representing sort of like what are the challenges that your deity or your whatever you believe in is putting forth for you to go through, and then what is the glory you're able to give to them, right? Like you do things in their name, and it is, you know, to glorify them. Now these two die are both equal. Like they're both D8s, maybe they're both D6s, or D10s. I don't know, right? Now what happens? Anytime, right now I'm going to do anytime you as a character, but this might change. Anytime you roll a 1, trials go up. Anytime you roll a max, glory goes up. Now, why did I say max? Well, because you might roll D10s, you know, 2 D10s, you might roll 2 D6, whatever. So whatever the max is, if you roll 6 on a D6 or 8 on a D8, etc. So now you have these 2 die that are on your character sheet. Let me grab 2 die. And they're constantly, they start off at 1, both of them. And then one of them starts glowing up. So all of a sudden your glory gets to 3 and your trials is still at 1. Or your trials gets to 3 and your glory's at 1. And I thought about the idea that maybe this is going to be any character, any of your allies roll 1s or max, but that might be a lot of bookkeeping to keep up with what they're doing versus just your die. So we're going to keep it at just your die at first unless it ends up being boring. Now, what does this mean? This means that there will be special powers on that character sheet underneath this that will give you different benefits, right? At any point in time, you can turn in for one of these benefits, or you might have passives. So let me explain it. So there is a scenario where trial is higher, trial greater than glory. There is a scenario where glory greater than trials. There is a scenario where glory or trials is a specific number, right? So these are different scenarios that come up, and any of these scenarios could be triggering something specific for your character, right? So let's just throw something random out, but let's say if your glory is higher than your trials, then that means you are getting a bonus to something, or it gives you access to a like that's a passive, or it gives you access to a quick ability that once you use it, your glory and trials immediately reset to 1 and 1. And it could be that some of the powers means that one of them has to be a lot higher than the other, or less, right? And so this is a mini game that kind of exists. It's very random, because you don't know which one's going to be, you don't know how you're going to be rolling. You know, it's like sometimes your trials are going to be higher than your glory, but hopefully both the glory and the trials powers might be interesting enough to say, am I going to try and save up for this or not, right? So we'll see how that goes. I like the idea. We'll see if it's enough of a game or decisions to make it interesting and fun. That's the big question. Is there enough of a game to make it interesting and fun for the person to be tracking and thinking about, right? And the cool thing is that you have the 3 different types of zealots. You have the faith, or you have the voice, the keeper, and the justice. And each of them might have a different starting trials and glory, right? So like the justice might have, I don't know, we're just making this up, but maybe the justice starts with 3 glory and 1 trial, right? Who knows? So you have this idea that these could be variable starting conditions for those characters, or the passives that are available are different based on that, you know, class. It could be that you tie a lot of it into the abilities they have that you're unlocking and that you're speccing in are very much specific to glory and trials, right? And what the rank is. So that's the potential zealot minigame. Now let's talk about, I have no idea where the talent one is so far. This is what I've been writing down. I've been writing down all kinds of stuff, and you can see this is using some of those mini games. This wasn't going so great though, because there was a lot there, right? And so where am I kind of at this point in time? Well, I'm still at an idea of, it pretty much comes down to how much is the mini game, the construction of the spells, versus how much agency do you have with spells right off the bat, right? So I'm trying to think about this game, and right now I think that I'm going to go more elemental magic, 4 elements, right? And then I'm trying to think about what is it that what do I want to be doing with this mini game in terms of the, like, how do I want magic to be existing, right? So as of now, I have this idea that you have an effects column, you have a damage or row, you have a damage row, and then you have I don't know what else yet. Like there's probably something else here, right? And in essence, the choice is going to be: are you putting something towards having an effect, or are you putting something towards having damage? I like that how Vagabond, the game with Instructor Boy, how Terran did his magic, where he says you can either have an effect or damage. Because I was thinking about that the last couple of days, and I think that's really interesting. You know, if you allow someone to be able to do a big blast of damage and it blinds everyone, like that might be, you might be coming into way too much power for your casters. Now, they might not come online as much until later in a combat, but if they're able to do something like that, it's going to make everyone else at the table feel crappy, right? Everyone should feel an equivalent level of awesome, hopefully, right? And so I like the idea that you can have effects, right? And then you're going to have damage, and you're going to choose which path you're going to be moving things up or which one you're going to be tapping into at a time. You can't tap into both. I also had this idea for, and it might be up there, I don't know where it is, but the only other ideas I have so far is the idea for concentration or duration of a spell. Because I was trying to think about time. I like the idea that, say I'm rolling 2d6 typically for my action, for my damage, and whatever I rolled for that spell, I can then take one of those dice and I can put it on whichever effects or damage I chose, and I keep that face up high, right? Now, what does this do? It means that from my next couple rounds, if I'm actually going to be rolling when I rolled a damage, I've only got one die. I'm using one of my die to maintain the effect or damage that I had before. And that die, whatever the pip was on it, whether it was a 5 or a 3 or a 2, matters. Because that's going to be up, and every round it's going to tick down. It's going to move down the track. It's going to tick down from a 5 to a 4 to a 3. And whenever I get hit or I take damage, I have to, in essence, pick up that die and roll it, and I have to roll lower than the number, or higher. That Ivan just shows up. But the idea being that you're going to have to roll it, and it's going to have to be, you know, lower or higher to maintain it. And so it becomes harder to maintain the longer you've done a spell or something. I don't know. I don't know if thematically it makes a ton of sense, but I like the mechanic so far, right? I like the idea that if I'm concentrating, I don't have an extra die, and that die also is the timer, and it might have a built-in concept for the concentration. The other thing I liked is that if I do 4 elements, I can then have a chart of sorts. So let's just put I can have this chart here. And the chart is going to, I'm just making this sloppy, so bear with me. The chart is going to have the different elements, right? So you're going to have the elements over here on the left, fire, wind, earth, water. And then across here are the different, there might be like different types of effects, right? Where it's like, it's letting you know what of these elements are good. These will be filled in, good at some things and not as good as other things. So if you're doing like a protective barrier around yourself to keep things from hitting you, wind is going to be awesome at that. Earth is probably going to be damn good at that. Fire and water might not be as good, right? So you're going to have different levels in these. You know, as a caster, you're going to choose, 1, 2, 3, 4 to put in those. And whichever ones you choose are going to have different variable abilities with different type of powers, meaning that they have caps almost in their effects. And I already thought about one thing that would be cool is that, wizards are going to have, or talents are going to have low AC, but I already realized that tapping into the fact that the way bolster works, not bolster, sorry, brace. So brace as a defensive tactical action is that for the rest of the current turn, you double your armor class, which is a damage reduction. And so if a caster only has like a 1 armor class, that's brutal. But if they have a level 4 in air magic, it could be that for that round, that, like if they cast that spell where that becomes their wind armor, that all of a sudden if they use the brace tactical action, they're using that value. So now they have an 8. So it's like there's going to be some really interesting ways to tap into the levels of these magic. This is not a mini game, but this is just a cool reference chart. And the effect value is going to tie into this sort of effect track and damage track. I don't know what this one's going to be yet. This is probably going to be nothing. So we'll see. We'll see how this goes. Over here, this was my really tacking into the concepts of the Rolling Realms. But the problem with that is that I felt like some of this was it was too resource management, and I was trying to see how can I get away from pure resource management like mana points. So anyways, this is where we're at so far. I'm probably going to sit down and try to hammer out the full wizard mini game, or the talent mini game tonight. And so I'll let you guys know when that's done and how that turns out. See you guys. Hit the bell, subscribe, yada yada.